Okay, so I've now started the recording for today's webinar. Um, so hello, thank you, and great to see everyone. Brilliant to see so many familiar faces, and thank you for joining our December Inspire webinar, Democracy Takes Time. My name's Stephen Mallet. I'm a researcher at Ipsos and part of the Inspire team. I'm joined today by colleagues across the consortium, but particularly looking forward to hearing from Olivier and Nadia from Platonique Foundation, as well as Dr. Sonia Bussu from University of Birmingham and Dr. Dayo Eseonu from Lancaster University. Today, we're going to be examining the conceptual origins of time as a feature of social and political life, but particularly its relevance to democratic and participatory processes. Within that, we will be understanding more about the ways in which democracy itself takes time, but not everyone has the same share or entitlement to access it. Today's webinar will draw on our recent paper titled Democracy Takes Time, Intersectional Temporalities in Participation and Deliberation. The paper itself draws on temporal theories, particularly looking at phenomenological concepts, but also critical theory concepts around the role that temporal inequality plays and the uneven distribution of time plays in particular as an access of injustice in participatory and deliberative processes. In today's session in particular, we're going to be looking at why time is an overlooked axis of inequality in participatory processes, but also how marginalized groups in particular face forms of time poverty and precarity in lives that restrict political engagement. So without sort of further ado, I'm very excited to hand over today to Olivier, who's going to get us started.
Thank you very much. So if you can hear me, just let me know so I can start. Is that okay? You hear me correctly? Yeah, do you see my screen?
Yeah, all good.
So thank you very much for joining. Basically, what we'll be looking at, I'm just correcting you, Stefan, very shortly. The paper was presented at the CPR conference as a draft working version. It's not yet published. Particularly and partly, we also do that webinar to get you helping us understanding better what we're working at, with these dark materials called time and space. Basically, I'd like to start with showing up a video. It won't be an experimental webinar, but I think it's important to look at other ways of participating and other ways of perception of times and political implication of us, of communities. So I'll jump quickly over the video, and my colleague Nadia will share with you a Mentimeter, so you can also express what you think this video is telling us or you.
If you knew how many times it took me to get here, to this place, right in front of you, this place, how I had to fight through crowds of humiliation, how I had to fight, and how I had to cover up my own face and carry my mother, your mother, her mother, the mother in my womb, the mother in my womb. This place, this place, this place, this place, this place. And now here I am in this place. This place, I know it, I think it's mine. This place, I know it. Because it's got my eyes, my crooked smile. This place. And when I'm hurting, I look outside and everyone else is hurting too.
So that could last for a bit more of time. It's a very exceptional piece of art. So back to just to let you know about the context, is the work by Moore Mother from the Black Quantum Futurism Collective. My colleague Nadia is sharing in the chat a little Mentimeter, asking you what this type of this piece, is it shifting your sense of time as you enter this space? Of course, we'd have to see the whole piece, but I think it's also important to start with non-discursive element in this webinar as we look at time and space, but also like non-dialogic ways of communication. So this video is from the Black Quantum Futurism Collective. And I guess you may have heard about it. Their artistic interventions are really offering valuable insights into temporal justice and alternative temporalities. We'll have Dayo's presentation digging into these ideas. But I think Afrofuturism and Afrodiasporic within the work of Black Quantum Futurism is really what inspired us as a starting point of this paper. So how these type of narratives are challenging dominant temporalities and oppression and structures. And I think partly the work of that collective is also very well informing what we do as a practice. You may know that Inspire is also looking at art-based methodology to build up like a better inclusive participation and involve marginalized communities into participation. So I think it's also worth looking at that type of hands writing workshop results, and this is basically what we do. So we basically pack up all these inspiration and many more sources to build this on really like working in progress paper. I think it has been very well introduced. I just want to let you know what we're going to be doing today. So I'll be literally letting you know about the framing and also the motivation about working on this very rich and very simple idea, but very urgent. The fact that time is not neutral in democracy. We'll also share with you another analytic framework with 3 levels of times. And we have Dayo digging into Afrofuturism's chronopolitics, very exciting. We'll ask you to engage with us with Q&A all along the webinar. So please use the chat. My colleague Nadia and Stephen from Ipsos will gather your questions and will basically be in charge of interrupting us. And we'll also have an hands-on activity facilitated by my colleague Nadia, looking at mapping intersectional temporalities, and then Nadia will be also responsible to help with the collective debrief at the end. So again, thanks a lot. You've been introduced, but Dayo, Sonia, and Nadia, you're really an inspiration to me. So looking at the main problem, traditional models usually assume that citizens or community members can participate on equal temporal terms, yet research, as Stefan was mentioning, shows otherwise. So marginalized groups across race, class, gender, migration, and what we identify as colonial legacies face time poverty, acceleration, or fragmentation that constrain usually their ability to deliberate, while privileged actors enjoy usually temporary autonomy and influence. So the problem is time is not neutral, as we understood. Deliberative processes often rely on short consultations and strict deadlines, privileging those with flexible schedules. Temporal inequalities are all over. So precarious workers and carers experience fragmented time, while privileged groups enjoy temporal autonomy. And slowly the paper drives us to policy recommendation and what we could call temporal justice. We're not quite 100% happy with the term, but it's basically a call for fair distribution or equal distribution and recognition of time as a democratic resource. So this webinar is also very inspired by a lot of lectures. We mentioned a couple of them. What you see is a couple of illustrations. We're working together with groups of migrant women as part of a legislative field process in Barcelona. So we look at, and we have a lecture club, a book club, and we also look at simplifying sometimes literature. So we look at different models, and we basically organize our conceptual framework around these 2 dimensions, the structural dimension, which that Art Logs highlights in his critique of presentism. We're also looking at the experimental dimension, and we'll look also an example together with Sonia on youth-led participation, where we can identify what Rickers called the temporalities and the need for sensitivity to varying narrative tempos, as he's mentioning. So again, we're also looking at lots of works from Wadi, Saki, and Conway on time poverty, but also I'm thinking of works on intersectional time poverty. So it's never a single axis, as even times is unequally distributed around race, gender, class, and health. We also have a conceptual framework which looks at ethical dimension and the ecological dimension of time, looking at deep time. But this is a concept basically that we won't discuss today because we have only an hour. But if you're interested in any of these dimensions, we're happy to work further with you. Just get in touch with us or leave your email in the chat. And again, we could go on and on with different lectures. So, let's imagine we could also have extend this idea of a book club together with you and having like nice lecture session. And we'd also like to touch upon the analytical framework that we're building. Sonia Bussu in the room has been reviewing all of it. So please feel free to correct me, Sonia, if you're not happy. But we're looking basically through what we call a macro level rhythm lens. So we're examining institutional calendars, electoral cycles. That's the first dimension. That's the dimension of the classical participation or political involvement we allowed to perform. We look also at experiential temporality, recognizing time as lived and narrated differently across intersectional identities and cultures, shaped by class, race, gender, and caregiving responsibilities. And I think Dayo's intervention will also inform us a lot on these different perceptions or cultural perception of time and how this gets political and talks to our memory and our future. And we'll also look at temporal commitments, and I quickly mentioned deep time concepts, but we also will be looking at orientations toward long-term engagements and phasing care, trust building, and designs that shall resist the commodification of attention. And again, a couple of illustration working together on a cooperation basis with minority groups in Barcelona. So our calendars should count to. We should think of plural rhythm. When we think about experiential temporality, we should all slow down, which is a message to myself actually, and listen longer. And again, looking at temporal commitments, this is all about what, intergenerational, not only intersectional justice, but I think the intergenerational aspect is also important to bring on the table. So that's it as a framing. If you have any questions, you can keep it for the Q&A session. Now I'd like Dayo to get in and talk about Afrofuturism lens, looking at time perception and politics. Dayo, if you're ready, please come in. Thanks.
I'm ready. Thanks, Olivier, for the introduction. Hi, everybody. I'm excited to kind of explore this with you guys, even as I'm exploring it myself. So I'm going to be talking about the way that I'm engaging with Afrofuturist understandings of time. Next slide, please. Actually, before going to the next slide, that picture on the bottom of the slide is a Sankofa bird. And it's from the Akan people of Ghana, West Africa, which is a powerful reminder to learn from the past wisdom, history, and experiences to inform and improve the present and future. So you've got kind of the bird looking backwards as well as kind of but facing forwards. And then the next slide, please. What I'm going to play now is a video. If you've not watched Sinners, this apology is going to be a spoiler for you. So look away if you're planning to watch it later. But what the video shows us is basically Black people have always known about time differently, that it doesn't follow a straight line. It's not sort of just simply past, present, and future, and they go that way, but actually understanding that it's more of a spiral, it's interconnected. We can't look to the future without kind of learning from the past. So the video that we're going to play in the next few seconds is a scene from the movie Sinners, which I think really illustrates this kind of interconnectedness with past, present, and future from Black people's perspective, and it uses the genre of music to show it, and hopefully it would have the same powerful effect as it did it did. Just to also kind of do a caveat, the video is talking more about the technical elements, but just pay attention to the visuals and the ways that past, present, and future show up. So if you could play it, please.
What's going on? I'm Ryan Coogler, and I'm the writer-director of Sinners. So this is Sammy performing I Lied to You, which is our midpoint of the film, and it's kind of like a hero moment for him. This song was written by the great Raphael Sadiq, and Ludwig Göransson, our composer, and Raphael is from Oakland, kind of a local legend where I'm from. So it was an honor to have him on this. And with this, we wanted to use Michael Shaver's editing skills to kind of establish where everybody is and what their stakes are in the observation of this. So you see Smoke here in one corner, you see Stack, and they have a kind of an ongoing argument about how successful this night is going to be, what it's going to take, what Sammy's role should be in this. So setting up that kind of triangle, Sammy with the twins between them, and playing on that triangle as an idea. Here you got Delta Slim in a flashback, giving Sammy a little bit of a context to his skill and the responsibility that comes with it and the legacy of it. And this conversation gets suspended because Wumi Masaku's character, Annie, who is a conjure woman, is giving her context, and she's actually restating something that we've heard at the beginning of the film. She kind of gave a warning that musicians will have the capability of doing this in this movie, and here we're seeing it play out, and we slowly introducing these ancestor spirits, both from the past and the future, and we wanted to do it in a fluid, continuous take. Obviously, we're shooting this here with IMAX film cameras, 15 perforations per frame, 65 millimeter, 70 when projected, and we had to get up on that stage and kind of rotate around and really be definitive about when we introduce these ancestors and how they come in. And Ludwig, at the same time, is changing the music. Akaman Jones, our choreographer, is changing the choreography ever so slightly so that folks still feel like they're in their time, but also outside of it as we get more and more heightened in this moment. And with this swirling feeling, we wanted to give the feeling of an incredible concert and being kind of swept away and overwhelmed by the artistry.
No se trata solo
Okay,
de
thank you.
vivir la vida, sino
Can go back to the slides. Thank you. So for me, that is such a powerful illustration and part of the beauty of Afrofuturism, because it really kind of helps to visually tell stories about African history. So I don't know if you noticed that there were African drummers up to sort of futuristic electric guitar playing. There was also kind of, if you're a 90s child, some 90s beatboxing and things like that. And it really kind of brings to mind the underpinning chronopolitics of Afrofuturism. Okay, next slide, please. What I would want to talk about is, first of all, is the idea of time as a colonial construct. So in 1884, the time as we know it, prime meridian, was set in Greenwich, imposing a Western concept of time globally and disregarding indigenous and localized temporalities. And here, we start to see how time linked to efficiency often comes at a cost to well-being, inclusivity, and connection to natural cycles. So for example, my people, the Yoruba people from Nigeria, had a 4-day week. That was what they had before they had to change the calendar to fit with the Western time. And now the Western sort of concepts of 4-day weeks are coming back into favor. But the Yoruba, I think I can't pronounce it properly, but Kojowa calendar had 4-day weeks as a thing because they were connected to kind of natural cycles and how things worked. So that's time as a colonial construct. And then we want to also think about, if we were thinking about decolonizing or having a decolonial approach to time, really asks us to pay attention. Actually, if we can go to my next slide, if we pay attention to the past, because European modernity will have us kind of condemn the past. I quite like this quote. There's this condemning the past to death as a tomb of irrationality and celebrating the future as this promise of perfectibility. We know how this perception of time condemning the past, how concepts of time and history give meaning and legitimacy to particular political actors, groups, and ideas, and leaves some of this kind of, like I already kind of talked about previously, indigenous understandings of how time and this chronopolitics of time works. What then does this mean, I guess, when we're thinking about, so next slide, please. Hansen, 1999, really talks about racial time. So it can help us to understand the connections between past, present, and future. So this idea of waiting as part of the temporal disjunctures that come from race and racism. Race and minoritized groups tend to perceive the material consequences of social inequality. And I think the paper that will be presented in more detail later, or the examples that will be presented in more detail later will kind of bring this to light about the material consequences of social inequality, as they tend to wait for things to happen, or at least the way the society is structured keeps them in this perpetual waiting. I know Martin Luther King is quoted with saying in one of his famous speeches that the moral arc bends towards justice, but we know that that is not true. There's a lot of waiting. Liberals will say, oh, this is not how you kind of fight for racial justice. You need to wait, be orderly. We need to look at something else first. So all these kinds of helps us to think about racial time. The other way that answered helps us to think about time as well, this idea of time appropriation. We see time and time again about the Baratunde Thurston talks about Black people in particular were the machines before the machine age. And in COVID, we saw that they were the ones who were basically keeping society running in the jobs that they hold. When we think about the famous kind of boycotts, both sort of across the pond and also here in the UK with the Bristol boycott, it's that time appropriation where racial minoritized people constitute a collective social formation to decide to intervene in public spheres and public debate to affect a positive change for our overall position and location in society. So that's quite an important thing that I would like to kind of keep in mind when we're thinking about racial time, is that there's actually, rather than just waiting, there can be an activation of this time appropriation. And then finally, it's this ethico-political relationship between temporality and notions of human progress. There's this belief, and I think in the way that people tend to talk about future, is that there must be an improvement on the present. But actually the space for the struggle for that better future is now. And that's where chronopolitics of Afrofuturism encourages us to think about what is required now to alter what is an extant historical path towards this new time. Next slide, please. So thinking about time and deliberation or deliberative and participatory processes is that we need to, so this is from Rashida Phillips. She's just done a beautiful book about time and the master's tool. Liberation requires that reimagining of temporality itself, acknowledging that progress cannot be divorced from reckoning with historical violence. Future is resistance through the remembrance and ever-expansive timescape that disrupt the timelines. It's our ability to hack it, to open up accessibility into the future, to really reimagine sort of pro-Black futures where Black people are free and liberated in the future. Instead of Butler, for example, instead of treating slavery as the past, she collapsed these temporal boundaries, insisting that the structures remain embedded in the present. And so we need to keep this history urgent, embodied, and politically alive to understand like inequalities now, and also to kind of try and prevent it from happening in the future. Eseonu really was quite fundamental in me understanding, I guess, why I am interested in Afrofuturism. Is if the future is seen as this chronopolitical terrain, because we know that the past has been quite contested, then the inquiry into production of futures becomes fundamental. So the critical work of manufacturing tools capable of intervention within the current political dispensation becomes super important. So, this feeling of we're running out of time, we need to act now. We need to kind of envision an approach to time that values connections and care with ourselves, with others, and with nature beyond this clock, beyond this kind of code of urgency, but to sit with the past to kind of look to the future. And just on my last slide now, this is me kind of thinking about what do I mean? How would time, this Afrofuturist understanding of time, impact on a participatory and deliberative process? So it's very kind of what's the word? Infantile? No, not infantile, that's not the word. It's infancy, so it's quite kind of a new idea. But if anybody has kind of money or connections to money that would willing to try out this approach, please let me know, contact me. But the idea here is drawing on the truth and reconciliation commissions that are used in kind of in conflict or post-apartheid sort of societies is truth and renamed truth and reparations is where people come together to really understand histories of slavery, colonialism, and counter stories. So the ways that Black people have always resisted from kind of writing history's routes of escape in the way that FHEA is designed. Also kind of bringing in testimonies from Black people experiencing structural racism, to the present, and then creative methods of deliberation that access imagination of just futures. And so, I think I'll stop there. But I guess what I'm trying to, if there's anything that you take away from sort of my offering about my Afrofuturist understanding of time, is that we really need to kind of think about how histories of and ongoing legacies of colonialism and slavery impact on what is being discussed in these processes, and how can we then use these processes to reimagine just futures for racially minoritized people. That's me.
Thank you very much, Dayo. I think your camera is off.
I
know that I know that originally we thought about like stopping here and then getting like because there's lots to say, I guess, on your also experience on Afrofuturist research practices, avoiding extractivism, expanding agency and future making. But since we start talking about art-based methodologies, I'd like to jump and let over to Sonia, as we will be basically talking about the youth-led process that involves a lot of what you just introduced and what the framing of this paper talks about. So Sonia, if you're ready and if you're okay, let's keep the questions for the Q&A session. So I'm not sure, I cannot see the chat, but I'd like to invite you, Sonia, to jump in.
That's great. Thank you. Yes, and I guess what I'm sharing now, it's some reflection on a project whose design also considered the different temporalities and time barriers to participation as well. And so youth-led processes often face temporal mismatch. Young people operate within fast and precarious timelines. Institutions move very slowly and bureaucratically. And so the Mindset Revolution project sought to bridge the gap by amplifying youth voices in mental health policy through creative and digital participation. It was delivered by a partnership of academics, practitioners, civic tech developers, so the Platonic team as well, and 23 young people between 16 and 25 years of age. And this was a very diverse group along race, class, gender, identity. Many were from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and racially minoritized communities, and many had direct experience of mental health challenges. And Mindset Revolution really positioned them as co-creators, not participants. It has three main strands, including legislative theatre, where young people dramatized systemic barriers within mental health systems and co-created policy proposal with an audience of policy stakeholders and community members. There was also a co-designed digital space on the Decidim platform, and then a participatory evaluation using creative methods such as podcasts, poetry, visual arts. And these approaches highlighted both the transformative potential, but also the challenges of doing this kind of work, the persistent power imbalances, the resource constraints, the short-term funding cycles, and really highlighted the need to view participation not as a punctual ad hoc event, but an ongoing creative practice grounded in the young people's lived experience and really non-linear and complex temporalities. And I think you have skipped, yeah, you are on the right slide, perfect. The Mindset Revolution's approach scaled also internationally. So it became Youth Mental Health Beyond Borders, linking the young people and the partnership in Manchester with youth academics, practitioners, and policymakers in Barcelona through different events and online dialogue and innovations like the tarot of legislative theatre that maybe Olivier will talk about briefly later. So the idea was to really reframe policymaking as imaginative storytelling. And these projects really demonstrate how creativity and play can sustain democratic engagement over time. Temporal inequalities and power inequalities are deeply entangled. And so these marginalized young people that we were working with often lacked both time and voice. And addressing one without the other just doesn't work. And so the solution for us was in trying this multi-scalar design, so to speak, to try and reconfigure institutional calendars of participations, which can not be about compressed events. Participation has to be embedded in people's lives and really adapt to diverse life freedoms. It's also important to recognize that the lived temporalities shaped by race, gender, class, and so we try to create these temporal zones for care, creativity, and reflections, and these spaces that can slow down as well and allow for trust building. And this was there was never enough time for these trust building processes actually, and investing in relationship and trust building has to be the basis of any meaningful participatory process. And we really try to foster long-term engagement through connected projects. And iterative cycles and also multi-modal approach, so the diverse methods, arts-based methods, but also creating spaces for ongoing accountability mechanisms to sustain participation, to open dialogue between the communities and the policymakers beyond the list of recommendations, and really try to pluralize democratic time and redistribute power by validating these diverse temporal and cultural rhythms. So what did we do effectively? We designed overlapping routes into engagement that were light, medium, and deep. So young people could step in and out depending on the different complexity they were navigating at that particular point in time. And they were often combining study, work, care responsibilities, and health demands. So the light routes included proposing ideas and resources in this co-designed digital space, or writing blog posts, participating as spectators in the legislative theatre performances. The medium routes involved participation in legislative theatre process as youth actors, and participation in the research co-design and the online dialogues, or in the podcast conversation. And then there were the deep roots that were really centered on facilitation and young people taking the leadership. So 4 young people undertook training as legislative theatre facilitators with Katie Rubin, who is an expert in legislative theatre, and then they led this legislative theatre process with their peers. Another group literally built our space on the sitting from scratch. And then they also organized and led these online dialogues with their peers, but also policymakers. And then from the research group, some of the young people actually led on interviews with the partners and reflective sessions with the other young people participating, or also leading and organizing the podcast series. And so this spectrum recognized intermittent participation as legitimate rather than a failure to commit. And so people could commit more at certain times and then step back. And the group worked because other people would step in. So effectively, we widened the room for different tempos of presence, including also a different approach to leadership that we might call quiet leadership. So one of the young people that trained as legislative theater facilitators, and they have a very lyrical way of expressing themselves, and she mentioned that sometimes she feels like a tree, and so she doesn't want to act out. She wants to listen, and we provided a space where she could still lead and facilitate, but still be a tree. And so I think the legitimacy of this non-performative participation also matters a lot in mental health. And we effectively slowed the tempo, right? And we created these attentional sanctuaries or spaces of care where we could pause and reflect and rethink. And there were so many problems, miscommunication, power asymmetries, but we really invested a lot in these reflective spaces where we could challenge ourselves and our assumptions, and work together and develop together. And fanzine and podcasts also offer these lower pressure entry points that are crucial for those living with anxiety or with depression. So effectively, young people shaped their own space of participation as well as the collective process. We also added this policy change tracker, right, to make commitments from policy stakeholder traceable over time. We ended up with a manifesto including 9 proposals to make youth mental health support intersectional and youth-led. And this participatory, this strong emphasis on participatory scrutiny also became a practical way to extend political time for follow through. So this idea that participation is continuous, and so we're continuously finding new and looking for new channels to bring attention to this proposal, which are not easy policy outputs. They really require deep culture and systemic change. I can leave it here if you want, Olivier, and I know that you also have something to add to this because you've also been part of this project. So yeah, if you want to comment on the tarot of
I would not go through extra slide, just opening up to another art-based methodology that is less discussive, and I think tarot is and the inspiration is my colleague Nadia also on designing a tarot together with the youth-led group. Makes sense in a way of reclaiming future adoption of all these policies that are happening or that are really co-created. So I won't go through it. I'd love to have more of a Q&A now. So I'm not sure my colleague Nadia and Stefan have been collecting. I stopped to share now, so you can see who we are. So we're not hiding anywhere behind slides and visuals. Stefan or Nadia, I'm happy now to bring I'm not sure Dayo has been able to come back with a camera on, but yeah, you could ask Dayo or whoever, Sonia or me. So please, Nadia, can you go?
Yeah, of course. So maybe one of the questions that we had also thought about were who's always reacting to someone else's deadlines, and what keeps us kind of stuck in this constant scramble, I think is something universal we experience. So any insight into how this, whose deadlines and who is scrambling, and if you see any patterns or tensions or insights from your experience with Inspire, that would be interesting to know about, I think.
don't know who's starting, if Dayo wants to comment on this, or anyone also from the people attending. So like from my perspective, I think a lot of we draw a lot of learning from this project that I mentioned, Mindset Revolution and Youth Mental Health Beyond Borders, to rethink the design and the co-design of participatory spaces when we particularly when we want to make them more inclusive. And I think without flexible scheduling and a synchronous path, many of these young people would have been really structurally timed out of participation. And we had people with mental health challenges that were constantly waiting, like on waiting list, and they really had interrupted lives. And students that were juggling unstable work and study that really saturated their weeks. So it is a spectrum of light to deep roots, respect that is intermittent present, but we were constantly fighting with institutional deadlines and timelines, and academic timelines are also often in conflict with the young people and the practitioner timelines, and there was racialized delay and exhaustion, and that really limits the real freedom to prepare and participate and sustain engagement. And so I think we talk a lot in Inspire about democratic capabilities, and I can see Olivier is also here, but it really requires, it is like restoring democratic capability really requires redistributing and reorganizing time, and perhaps really co-write and rewrite the timetable with the people we want to include.
Hmm. And then,
if I may, maybe to add on that, sorry, Nadia, to interrupt you. We've seen as especially when you talk about the youth-led participatory policy process, a lot of frustration on institutional slowness, which sometimes is described as institutional violence. I think it's important also to, as a reflection, it's not part of the paper, but as a reflection of the Inspire project, how can we institutions start recognizing time as a democratic resource rather than an invisible burden? So why we're thinking of it, we'd imagine, because we are very practical people at Platonic, so we'd imagine what would be a temporal justice checklist. So we're tracking the adoption of the policy, but what about tracking time itself? So if you think of a temporal justice checklist, you'd have like possible answers, or imagining a survey: who has discretionary time, who doesn't, where do deadlines clash with lived realities, are moment of rest, care, and recovery built in, are asynchronous methods available? I think digital participation is important here, but also, and very importantly, does the process value invisible labor? So there's lots of voluntary political participation around. If you think of a citizen assembly, it's not only about the members of the assembly, it's about all the engagement with the larger public. And I think measuring time of voluntary work would also be worse. So I think this is something we're also trying to do on an Inspire platform. Will be beyond policy tracking. We're thinking of tracking the time as a resource here, as gold almost. So I'm not sure, Nadia, this is what I had in mind.
Yeah, I think that also answers a little bit. Paolo has asked a question: how do you suggest we capitalize on the information you shared to challenge what ultimately are capitalist structures around time and deeply ingrained in how institutions currently exist?
If Dayo's back, I think she could give us a brief message about it.
I am back, but my voice is back, but not my face. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Yeah, how do we suggest we to tackle the structures around time? I think there has to be, more conversation about how time is structured. I think moving beyond, I think a checklist is an important starting point, but getting people to understand. I think increasingly I'm hearing about practitioners sort of reflecting on when these processes can happen, but I think there has to be recognition about the practicalities of, commissioners, from what I kind of hear, is want things to happen speedily. I think there's that kind of commitment to efficiency and quickly to get the legitimacy quickly. I know one of the critiques that has come through from commissioners about citizen assemblies, how much time they take and how they would rather accelerate it. So I think there needs to be deeper conversations about actually these things take time. These processes need to happen at the speed of trust. Is something I've also heard other people talk about. And whether then I guess the messaging is then that actually taking the time now leads to I don't know, policy efficiencies later or effectiveness later on, but that we can't rush these processes. And I think about capitalism, about whose time is valued. I think one thing Inspire has done really quite well is to value people's time. It can be monetarily, particularly when that works. There could also be other ways that people's times are valued, but it's about conversations with the participants. So, for example, those on welfare might have kind of restrictions about how money that they can get and things like that. But I think just having how valuing that invisible labor, valuing what people are bringing to the table, is really important. And I think also time in terms of the framing of the issues. And I've written about this because I think, and I'm going to take it back to my work about racial justice, is, racial justice is not seen, I mean, some people will see it as a pressing issue, but it's kind of subsumed by more other sort of I'm doing in quotes, but you can't see me, pressing issues in quotes. And so how do we get that on the agenda as part of like pressing things to be considered? I'm waffling now, so I'm going to stop, but hopefully that's useful.
Yeah, and just to close, Dayo, you mentioned this Martin Luther King with the arc of justice, the arc towards justice. I'm not sure. Can you correct me?
Yeah. Yeah, that oh gosh, you confused me now. That the moral arc of justice, the moral arc of time bends towards justice or something like that.
Yes, yes. And I think it's been quite interesting because Ta-Nehisi Coates, that was like the main crux of like a lot of his discourse 5 or 6 years ago. And now he hasn't, I don't know if he would say the same thing, but he simply is like, sometimes you lose. Historically, that is how that happens. And I think something interesting to think about also is in the Black Lives Matter movement and a lot of social movements, a rhythm of how movements happen and accepting when losses and gains and time function together, I think is something also to think about, not necessarily when advocating in a policy space, but in this other space where we are thinking about the emotional well-being and our own sense of existential understanding of time and change.
Yes, indeed.
I actually think that oh, sorry, Dayo, were you responding
No,
to?
no. I was just sorry. I was doing the call and response thing of. I agree. Sorry.
No, I think that's great. I also want to speak to some of the comments in the chat. How do we actually do that? How do we push back between the institutional times or capitalist times? And I think as practitioners and as academics interested in inclusive participation, we really need to make us stronger. We need to push back against the efforts to make deliberation fast and easy and online, and deliberation takes time. Like, it's fundamental to invest in relation and relational trust, and I think even bits should time should include and cost the sort of trust building processes, and thinking also about participation as a continuous and embedded process rather than always in terms of short-term projects and ad hoc events, because otherwise we just don't really we're just adapting to the capitalist times rather than reacting and sort of developing different timelines that reflect the temporalities of the participants that we want to include. And so I think flexibility, adaptability, allowing a participatory process to change. So if the clock of the participants changes, then the times of the participatory process have to change with it. So co-writing the timeline of participation with who participates, and allowing people this intermittent participation, because not everyone can be present at all times in the same way. And so I think sort of building this collective agency and trust, a relationship of trust, can also support people to step in and out, depending on the complaint, without losing their voice, depending on the different complexities they're navigating and the different temporalities they have to navigate. So it's hard, but I think perhaps just in terms of simple design choices, just think about that.
Just got a couple of
Yeah,
Yeah.
Nadia. Oh, sorry.
I was just adding very quick insights on and also responding to the comments in the chat. So I think about like how can we, the question would be institutionalizing some temporal justice. So I would think of recommendations that we've talked about redistributing temporal resources, but we need also somehow to recognize intersectional time poverty, and I think there's also some writing from Yusuf in Leving, for example, like clearly, imagining solutions such as targeted support and preparatory time for marginalized groups, but also for the most affected by a deliberative process. So what is the topic of it? But I would also think, since we mentioned the Inspire democratic capabilities framework, I think we should look definitely at time retribution or time justice under using more art-based and digital modalities, as we have seen in a couple of examples. Which allows to slow down deliberation, but I think mostly enable non-verbal asynchronous engagement. And I think it's really a challenge. But talking about capabilities, I think where we need to, take the time to build capacities is, I would say, toward a resilient model of democratic temporality, and that would imply basically engaging primary schools in the dialogic and deliberative capacity building. And I think this is basically where time should be reconstructed, time for political participation, because there's many policy around the good use of time in companies. There's a few examples in the chat of different foundations looking at time use, but really what we're talking about here is time in reclaiming our right to participate. So it's a right to be politically active, but we need to jump over the limit of only participating once every 4 years. So I think connecting it to education should be a way of, rethink time and political participation. Sorry to be so long.
Olivier, do you think we should still share the Miro board, or?
What I would suggest, Nadia, I think it's important that we let also know that everybody in the audience, we know some of you, that we may use some of your insights. So maybe since we'd like to be sharp on a 1 hour webinar, I would recommend, can you, Nadia, present the Miro board? Then we'll be sharing the Miro board, and anyone in an asynchronous time could help perhaps feed it. Especially I'm thinking of the right columns on maybe it's not the right column on your screen. And I will also share the question if you cannot access the Miro board. So please show it up, and it may serve also like to feed the paper. So I'm sharing the link in the chat.
Yeah, so we made this Miro board for this chat. This is the democracy takes time, intersectional temporalities. And there's some key questions: whose time is privileged in participation, deliberation, whose time is constrained, and what temporal zones are needed in deliberation. And below are just some subtitles that might be helpful guiding questions to add more nuance, like whose time is privileged, whose urgency is prioritized, whose notion of punctuality is followed. And then here to the left, I have some references from Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man. Invisibility, let me explain, gives one a slightly different sense of time. you're never quite on beat. Sometimes you're ahead, sometimes you're behind. Instead of the swift, imperceptible flows of time, you are aware of its nodes, those points where time stands still or from which it leaps ahead, and you slip into the breaks and look around. I mean, this film is actually not the Invisible Man film, but I thought it was like quite interesting that the film The Invisible Man, this man wraps himself, and not once does he think about any form of like people know he's white by default in the film. It's kind of unusual. And then here we have Joy Buolamwini's work where she had to place a white mask on her face to be read by a censor so that she could continue working at her project on MIT. So these are the references, and this is here for you to contribute, think, or if you want to put your name or your email on your contribution, etc. Please feel free to do that so it's not just talking to an invisible ether. And I think that should wrap it up for me.
Nadia, can you add your email to the Miro board so maybe people get in touch with us too and get a contact. And we will be soon also like building up a consultation process on the Inspire platform and come back to you if there's not any GDPR issue on contacting you from your registration process. I'm not sure about that, Stefan. So we'd like to have maybe in the last 2 minutes, around only 2 minutes, we are under pressure ourselves. I'd love Sonia and Dayo to have the final word. And what do we do next? Sonia, you want to start? You're muted, so it's time and mutation.
Yes, I'm silencing myself. Yes, I mean, for me, it's really about rethinking the way we design these democratic innovations and how we think about not confining them to specific spaces, but embedding them in everyday life. And really co-design and co-write as much as possible, co-author the pace with who participates, and recognizing this non-linear lived temporality and resisting this presentist acceleration. So we have a lot of knowledge of different approaches to participation. So I think we need to ensure multimodal approaches, but really adapting them and constantly reflecting and challenging ourselves and co-designing with the people that should be involved, and absolutely try and fund as much as possible longer warm up for trust building, because trust is really the precondition for safe participation. It cannot be an afterthought. So yeah, I'll leave it here.
And I know as a final, maybe it's an obsession of me now. How can we learn from Afrofuturism and this like positive refusal of institutional timeframes? And how can we avoid being disconnected or disconnect people from their histories and futures? Maybe you don't have, it's not a 1 minute answer, but
Yeah, it certainly is a 1 minute answer. But I think what I would say is that basically, I think participatory and deliberative democracies, not processes that are embedded in kind of everyday lives as well as institutional settings, provide the opportunities for people to connect with their histories, and to then use these collective spaces to imagine different futures, just futures, for themselves and their communities. So that would be my 90-second summary.
Thank you very much, Stefan. You have the last word. You can kick us out elegantly.
No, it's just to reiterate, obviously, thank you from all of us to everyone who's attended and for your contributions, particularly to the Q&A. We really appreciate a lively sort of conversation and debate on the nature of this subject, particularly in this time where we're very, critically looking at intersectional temporal justice and its relevance, particularly from an Inspire's perspectives, concepts of justice and democracy. And obviously, if you're interested in sort of learning more or looking at this, you can obviously access further resources through our website. We'll also put a link to the Decidim platform, where particularly you can see updates from things that are ongoing with our pilot programs at the moment, where this is a particularly relevant and topical discussion. The only other thing to say beyond that is obviously we record these sessions and we will be publishing and sharing these, so you will be able to access this webinar via YouTube. And as of recently, we've now got a dedicated web page on the resources for the Inspire website where you can view all these webinars and our previous webinars as well. So just in wrapping up, just again, thank you everyone for attending, and hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks everyone for coming.